When a grandson began removing the old family farmhouse floor, he never expected to make history. Hidden beneath his grandparents' home lay something that would stun historians. What he found wasn't just treasure. It was a key to the past. The smell of rotting wood and the pile of dust covering each surface were the first thing Paul noticed when he stepped into the old family farmhouse. He covered his mouth and nose with a hand, rushing to open the windows to let out the stench of ancient. Then, as the sunlight shone on what looked like a disheartening mess of half-broken furniture and cobwebs, he sighed. What had he gotten himself into? The farmhouse had been empty since Paul's grandparents died, and his father David had inherited the property. For David, the house wasn't just a building. It represented every summer he spent helping his father repair fences, every holiday gathered around his mother's dining table, and every moment of his childhood preserved in weathered wood and worn floorboards. David wouldn't sell. He'd drive 40 minutes from town twice a month, methodically checking every lock, repairing broken windows and chasing away curious teenagers. The local hardware store owner would see him loading up his truck with supplies, paint that never made it to the walls, lumber that stayed stacked in the barn, and tools that remained in their packages. Next month, David would say, I'll start the repairs next month. The town watched the property slowly decay. Neighbors remembered when the farmhouse hosted community gatherings, and Paul's grandmother's garden won ribbons at the county fair. Now they called it the Mackenzie Ghost House. Not because anyone believed in spirits, but because it stood as a ghost of what their community used to be. Real estate developers left messages on David's phone. He deleted all of them. Then, when David died, he left Paul with a property frozen in time. The house that had consumed his father's final years became his responsibility. Bills piled up in the mailbox. Local kids spread stories about the man who used to patrol the grounds, keeping his father's memory alive in a distorted way. Paul didn't visit the farmhouse for several years after inheriting it. His life in the city kept him busy, and the thought of fixing the old place seemed impossible. The repairs would cost too much money, and going through all his family's old belongings felt too big a task. Then one day, he got a letter from the county. They said the house was becoming dangerous and needed repairs or they would tear it down. His insurance company also sent a notice. They wouldn't cover an empty house anymore. Paul knew he had to either fix the house or lose it completely. He took a week off work and drove to Tennessee. Standing in front of the farmhouse, he tried to calculate the costs. A new roof would cost $15,000. The electrical system needed complete replacement. Another $12,000. Plumbing repairs, structural work, and basic updates would add up to more than he could afford. I'll have to sell it, he decided. But first, I need to clean it out and make it look decent enough for someone to want to buy it. He started by clearing the front yard. The weeds had grown tall, making it hard to see the front steps. Those steps themselves were a problem. The wood had rotted so much they weren't safe to use. Inside wasn't any better. The wallpaper came off in long strips. Every room had cobwebs. Paul found chairs with broken legs in the kitchen. A TV that didn't work sat in the corner of the living room. Cardboard boxes filled every room, packed with his grandparents' belongings. Each morning, Paul picked one room to clean. He made 3 piles: things to keep, things to throw away, and things to donate. The living room took 2 days and the kitchen took 3. While sorting through the living room, he found his grandfather's books still on their shelves. He picked up his copy of Treasure Island, remembering how he read it. His grandfather would sit in his armchair nearby, telling his stories about sailing adventures and hidden treasures. Back then, Paul believed every word. Growing up, he'd decided they were just stories meant to entertain a child. His back hurt from lifting boxes. His hands were covered in dust. But the house was starting to look better. He could walk through rooms without bumping into things. Then came the day he decided to clean under the stairwell. It was a small space his grandmother had used as a closet. Old coats still hung on hooks inside. A vacuum cleaner from the 1980s sat in the corner. Paul removed everything from the closet and noticed that the carpet underneath was torn. He grabbed the edge to pull it up, thinking he'd replace it later. That's when he saw a metal handle bolted to the floor, hidden all these years under the carpet. He stared at it for a long time. Why would his grandparents put a handle on the floor? Why hide it under the carpet? The handle was round, about the size of his palm. It looked like the kind you'd find on a trapdoor. The wood floor around it had been cut in a perfect circle. Someone had planned this very carefully. Paul tried to pull it up, but the handle wouldn't move. He tried again, pulling harder. Still nothing. After several minutes of trying, his arms were tired, and the handle hadn't budged an inch. He sat on the floor, looking at his phone. Who could help with something like this? He scrolled through his contacts until he found Kingsley. the locksmith who had helped him change the front door lock some days ago. The renovation project had become much bigger than cleaning up an old house. Paul didn't know what lay under that handle, but he knew one thing. His grandparents had kept this secret for a reason. Kingsley arrived within the hour, his curiosity piqued by Paul's description. When he saw the metal plate, his expression changed from curiosity to professional interest. "This isn't just some random piece of metal," he explained, running his fingers along the edge. "This professional-grade floor safe was probably installed in the 30s or 40s. They built these directly into the foundation for a maximum security. Your grandparents must have had something valuable they wanted to protect." They worked together for hours, Kingsley applying various techniques to defeat the ancient locking mechanism while Paul held lights and handed tools. The sun had begun to set when they finally heard the telltale click of success. Paul gripped the handle once more. This time, the door swung open with a groan of protesting metal. The beam of his flashlight revealed standing water at the bottom of the safe, along with what appeared to be carefully stacked bricks. His heart sank as he remembered the pipe burst that had flooded the ground floor years ago. Any treasures hidden here had likely been destroyed by water damage. Still, he began carefully removing the bricks. They'd been arranged in a precise pattern, creating a protective layer over something deeper. He caught his breath as he lifted the last brick away. Below the protective barrier lay an unexpected trove of history, much of it preserved despite the flooding. The first item emerged from its decades-long rest, a 1937 coin-collecting book. While its cover showed water damage, the contents remained remarkably preserved. His grandfather had wrapped each page in protective materials, his foresight saving the collection from destruction. But this book was just the beginning. More coin books surfaced, each meticulously maintained. Then came loose coins, some common currency of their era, others unique. Paul recognized Indian head pennies, mercury dimes, and coins he'd only seen in collector's guides. His grandfather's passion for numismatics had run deeper than anyone suspected. The water-damaged dollar bills came next, their edges softened and stained by moisture. Yet even these told a story of careful preservation. They'd been organized by year and denomination, wrapped in what looked like waxed paper. Some had been selected for their unique serial numbers or printing oddities. Then came the silver bars. They gleamed in the flashlight beam as if they'd been polished yesterday, protected from tarnish by careful packaging. Many bore detailed engravings marking their origin and purity. Paul had never known his grandparents to collect precious metals. A rusted box caught his attention next. Unlike the other items, it seemed hastily added and less carefully protected. When Paul finally worked the lid open, he discovered jewelry and pocket watches inside. While some pieces showed damage from moisture, others remained in surprisingly good condition. Perhaps they were family heirlooms, or valuable pieces acquired over years of collecting. Paul stared at the growing pile of items from the safe. The task was too big for one person. He needed help moving and organizing these discoveries. Thankfully, his cousin Mark lived in the next county. One phone call later, he was on his way to the farmhouse. Mark arrived in his truck, ready to help with the work. They set up a workspace near the safe, laying out tables and lights to examine each piece. Paul handled the delicate items while teaching Mark the proper way to document everything. They used soft cloths to protect the coins from damage, following basic handling guidelines Paul had researched online. The organization process revealed more treasures. Silver dollars from the 1800s emerged from the pile. Buffalo nickels that kept their shine. Foreign coins from across the world. Most paper money showed water damage, but the coins remained in good condition. Paul remembered his grandfather teaching him about coin collecting when he was young. He'd shown him his small display case, but never mentioned the extensive collection hidden beneath the floor. The coins filled 3 storage containers. The silver bars needed their own box due to their weight. Paul checked every corner of the safe with his flashlight. But the underground safe wasn't the final surprise. The second discovery happened purely by chance. While clearing the study, Mark noticed something odd about the old coffee table. Its weight seemed unusually distributed. Closer inspection revealed another safe, which was built into the furniture itself. This safe proved easier to open, its mechanism having been better protected from moisture over the years. Inside, they found their grandfather's carefully maintained pistol collection, each firearm wrapped in waxed cloth. But the true treasure lay beneath the guns, a stack of bar notes bearing the signature of Joseph W. Barr. The significance of these notes wasn't immediately apparent until Paul began researching them. He turned to the internet for answers and posted each photographed item on social media, hoping someone could explain his findings. The response exceeded all expectations. Currency experts noticed something remarkable about the bills, the signature. Its presence changed everything. In 1968, Joseph W. Barr became Secretary of the Treasury. He held the position for 29 days, from December 21, 1968 to January 20, 1969. During this brief time, the Treasury printed bills with his signature. The numbers tell the story. The Treasury printed 458 million Barr-signed dollar bills. At first glance, this seems like a massive number. However, the Treasury printed billions of bills each year during that period. Barr's bills made up less than 1% of all currency printed in the late 1960s. Most Barr notes entered circulation. People used them to buy groceries, pay bills, and make everyday purchases. The bills wore out, banks destroyed them, and they vanished from existence. But Paul's grandfather had done something different. He recognized these bills might become significant. He gathered them, protected them, and stored them safely in the safe on his coffee table. A currency museum curator explained the significance. Finding a single Barr note today is uncommon. Finding a collection this size preserved in good condition is exceptional. These bills document a unique moment in U.S. Treasury history. The value of Barr notes varies based on the condition. Worn bills might sell for $20, $50, but well-preserved bills, like many in Paul's collection, can fetch hundreds or even thousands of dollars each. Beyond their monetary value, the bills revealed something about Paul's grandfather. He had not collected these notes randomly. Each bill showed signs of careful selection. He chose bills with clear printing, good paper quality, and minimal circulation wear. The collection included different denominations, 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s, all bearing Barr's signature. Each bill came carefully wrapped in protective paper, showing his grandfather understood proper preservation methods. A banking historian provided context. The late 1960s marked significant changes in U.S. currency. Your grandfather created a time capsule of this transition period. He preserved pieces of American financial history that otherwise might have disappeared. Paul discovered his grandfather had kept detailed notes about his collection. In a small notebook, he recorded when and where he acquired each bill. Some came from local banks, others through currency dealers. The notes revealed a methodical approach to building this collection over several years. The Barr notes represented just one part of the currency collection. The silver bars revealed something about why his grandparents collected them. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, many banks failed, and people lost their savings, but silver and gold kept their value. The dates stamped on the bars showed that his grandparents started collecting them in 1931, when things were at their worst. A historian explained, "People didn't trust banks then. These silver bars were like a savings account you could keep at home. Each bar has markings showing pure silver and weighs exactly 1 ounce. Your grandparents were being very smart." The coin collection was just as important. Paul learned his grandparents hadn't just picked up any old coins. They chose specific ones that told America's story. They had coins from years when mints didn't make many of them, or when they made mistakes that made certain coins unique. A coin expert explained, "See this 1955 penny? It's a double die. They accidentally stamped it twice, making the letters look doubled. They only made about 20,000 of these. Your grandparents got one and kept it perfect. That's amazing." The gun collection wasn't random either. Paul found 15 pistols, each one telling a story of American history. The oldest pistol dated back to 1865, a Colt revolver used by soldiers returning home from the Civil War. Next came an 1873 Peacemaker, the same type carried by lawmen in the American West. His grandfather had organized the collection by year, with small notes explaining where each gun came from. A 1911 service pistol from World War I sat next to a letter from the soldier who carried it through France. A 1927 police revolver still had its original badge number. The collection moved through time, showing how guns changed as America grew. Paul found his grandfather's records describing each purchase. He'd bought the Civil War revolver from a family in Virginia in 1950. The Peacemaker came from an old ranch sale in Texas. Each gun had paperwork proving it was real and showing who owned it before. The newest gun was a 1945 service pistol from World War II. Paul's grandfather got it from a fellow sailor he served with on their ship. They had stayed friends for 40 years after the war ended. The most valuable gun was a rare 1920 model that almost nobody had. Only 1,000 were ever made, and most were destroyed. Paul's grandfather had found it at a yard sale in 1963. Today, that single pistol could be worth more than all the others combined. The jewelry and watches were different from the other collections. They weren't valuable because they were rare, but because they belonged to Paul's family. He found his great-grandfather's pocket watch, which he brought with him when he came to America. There was also a locket with a tiny painted picture of his grandmother when she was young. Social media helped Paul understand more than just what things were worth. People shared advice about how to clean the coins without damaging them. Others knew how to fix the water damage on some items. Museum workers offered tips on how to store everything safely. Many people warned, "Don't clean anything until you talk to an expert." Sometimes cleaning old things can make them worth less. Even if they look dirty, that age is part of their history. Paul realized he hadn't just found valuable things. He'd found pieces of American history that his grandparents had carefully saved. Each item told a story about his family, America's past, and why people collect things that matter to them. The discoveries changed how Paul saw his grandparents. They weren't just collectors. They were historians who preserved important past pieces. Everything they saved had a reason behind it, whether it was historically important or personally meaningful to their family. Paul looked at his bank account and then at the renovation costs for the farmhouse. The numbers didn't add up. Keeping the house would cost more money than he had. But after finding his grandparents' collection, he couldn't bring himself to sell the property. He sorted through the items, making 3 piles. The first pile contained damaged coins and duplicate items. The second held the rarest pieces, the bar notes and unique coins. The third pile included items his grandparents had mentioned in their stories that meant something special to the family. Paul sold the damaged, and a couple of the rarest items to collectors, which gave him enough money to fix the farmhouse's roof and replace the rotting wood. He also used some money to install proper heating and cooling systems, making the house comfortable year-round. The rest of the rarest pieces went to the National Currency Museum. Paul agreed. The museum would preserve and display the items, but they stayed in the family's ownership. This meant future generations could see their family's contribution to American history. The remaining pieces stayed with the family. Paul built display cases in the farmhouse living room, where his grandparents' special items could be seen by everyone who visited. The farmhouse became more than just a building. Every month, family members gathered there. Kids played in the same rooms where Paul had once listened to his grandfather's stories. Parents showed their children the collections, explaining how their great-grandparents had gathered each piece. His family had become a piece of history and would be remembered forever by generations of Americans. Sometimes the greatest discoveries lie hidden in familiar places, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Do you think Paul did the right thing, surrendering most of his findings to a museum, or should he have sold them to the highest bidder? What forgotten stories might your family home contain? Share your tales of unexpected discoveries in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.